I'm realizing now more than ever that it's never been more true that we are like incredibly polarized and we are incredibly divided. And we, are losing like a huge part of our individuality just because we like don't have the ability to look at people who disagree with us and and have just like some degree of human respect, because as much as like we have, and see, the common response to that is always, well, oh, but when it comes to like human rights, that to me is not a compromise. It's not something I can compromise on. It's not something I can really, look at and see as a political issue. And I understand that, like, a lot of political issues to us who have very strong opinions about certain things, like they obviously don't seem like political issues, but they just objectively are, right? This idea that, labeling something as human rights automatically makes it not a political issue is just like, to me, empirically false. It just is. It still very much is a political issue, regardless of if it's a matter of what is or is not human rights. And I think, like, again, a lot of the rhetoric we see surrounding a lot of these issues, especially when it comes to like specifically topics related to LGBT folks, which is where the human rights label comes up quite a bit. As a gay guy, I've noticed a lot now that there's been this kind of narrative running around that, like, there are certain things that are just incontrovertibly the rights of LGBT folks, and so therefore those things shouldn't ever come under scrutiny. And my feeling, what I really want to respond to all this, and how I really want to just like tell everybody, is you have to get comfortable with being constantly having your mind changed, even in very small ways. The best way to approach politics, at least how I view it, is to constantly have that mind of like an undecided voter. And I'm not saying don't feel passionately about what you believe, but actively challenge what you believe. Go out and find content that goes against what you believe and look for places where you think they may make a good point. The problem today is that a lot of the times, a lot of the content we see on the internet is bad faith. It just is. It's just like there are people, commentators, politicians that are saying things just for the sake of saying them. They're not really trying to seek any truth of any situation. But, that's like, it doesn't, I think, yes, some of that can be somewhat beneficial because sometimes you can find things that, like, they say that like seem genuine and seem kind of like, okay, this is somewhat of a decent point. But I think like there's a lot of people, especially in my generation, who have kind of just decided that they're not going to do the work necessary to be a good, productive member of our political society. And yet they also want to have the kind of respect of people when it comes to their political opinions. And by respect, I mean they want to be able to expect their friends and their family to have certain views and not be like, and not be looked at like they're crazy for it. Because yes, I think like a lot of us who kind of just sit here and watch the political shitstorm of America, we do look at the people who are like hyper partisan and say, if you believe this and this and this and this, or if you believe in this party, or if you're voting for this politician, unfriend me. I don't want anything to do with you. I think a lot of us do look at these people and we're like, okay, that's like, that's kind of crazy because there's nothing behind it. There's absolutely nothing behind it. There's no like, I think it would be, and I'm trying to say this like from that in a way that won't come across as like very self-centered, but I think it would be more valid for someone like me to be saying something like that than someone who is just inherently never involving themselves in political discussions, is never even trying to seek out positive discourse with people. I think the fact that I go on Discord every day and I discuss with people who live in like the Netherlands, politics, philosophy, these kinds of debate topics, I think it makes it so that if I were to ever do that, which I don't think I would, but if I were to ever go online and say, if you voted for this person, don't be friends with me, right? I think it would carry a degree of validity to it, because at least I'm trying to challenge my perspective on certain things. At least I'm trying to like hear people out and to hear out perspectives. I think when you shut yourself off and you know, and especially like another big piece of it is the fact that we only have two options. So I don't give a fuck if you like say like, oh, if you vote for the, no, like who you vote for in the United States has very, very, very little to do with what you actually believe. That is just a fact. When you are down to two options, it says very little about what you think specifically with who you check off on the piece of paper. And ultimately, if you want that to change, if you want to be able to look at someone, ask them who they voted for, and then get like an inclination of the kind of person they are just from how they answer that question, if you want that opportunity, you have to advocate for the people to have more options. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the partisan Democrats who I see running around after this election generalizing Trump voters, not Trump supporters, Trump voters, right? People who just voted for him, happened to vote for him over Kamala Harris, right? And over the option of not voting at all, which a lot of people just don't do because they don't see as an option, right? A lot of the Democrats that are running around doing all this generalization shit, they are quickly finding out that a lot of the Trump voters that they're shitting on are people who also voted for characters like AOC. Characters that are some of the most progressive, in agreement with these partisan folks, characters of anyone of any politicians, right? AOC, someone who has attracted a very high degree of popularity among young Democratic and progressive voters, right? And so, yeah, like when I, you know, I watched Shuan Head's video about the election, post-election, and yeah, she went over, she explained how like, she didn't really explain, she observed that AOC after the election asked her supporters, like, why did some of you vote for me and for Trump? And the answer was almost always because we wanted change. The fact of the matter is, if you are going to come out of this election and just conclude that if someone voted for Trump, that you can't be friends with them because you can't even possibly understand why, you are simply, it's not that you can't understand why, it's that you're not trying to. And I understand that. Like, don't get me wrong. I understand why a lot of people in my generation are very quick to like look at people who vote for that guy, and they're, you know, they're really, really quick to like, you know, instead of trying to understand why people voted for him, they're very quick to make generalizations. But honestly, like, I think, hopefully I'm coming across in the way that I'm intending to. My point is that, like, you guys don't, you don't even try to understand something, and you're trying to generalize it. You can't really shit on something that you don't understand, and that's really what I'm seeing a lot of here. People do not understand how America's political system works. They don't even know the candidate. I mean, like, several people I know, one that I remember off the top of my head, didn't even know that Kamala Harris was the Democratic nominee. When I asked them, who are you voting for? They just said that woman. I'm like, are you serious? Like, this is the degree of, like, just how people are going into this blindly, and they're just listening to their friends when it comes to, like, what they should be saying and believing, right? It's just a lack of individuality and a lack of acceptance of individuality that is like unbecoming of a generation that really, I think, should know better than to think that like this degree of political individuality is unacceptable when it comes to these things. Donald Trump will not be someone I will probably ever vote for. He's probably, if at all, like, see, if all goes normally and as it should, he will not run for the presidency again. This will be his last term. He will be done. Let's say, for some fucking reason, they let him run again, even though constitutionally he's not allowed to. I won't vote for him. He's not someone that I think I ever could stomach voting for, and not because I just think he's repulsive, not because I think he's dastardly Don, not because I think that he's some sick weirdo. No, it's just the fact that number one, a lot of the things that he says I just don't think I stand for. I agree that illegal immigration is a problem. I don't necessarily think the way he wants to respond to it is the most effective way. I think it kind of just, it wastes money, and then also it like it doesn't really address, like it tries to take a big problem and fix it with a very small, quick solution, and I don't think historically we know that has ever really worked out well. Number two, like, I think he's just very unpresidential. I think I want somebody who's like a leader in that high office. And I've never gotten the inclination for that from him with that. January 6th was kind of like, I had already kind of I feel like the deal was already broken for me. I already viewed him as someone I probably wouldn't ever go and actually vote for. Even though, like, rhetorically, I found myself having to defend him just because the anti-Trumpers were so fucking bad at being anti-Trumpers. It was actually insane. I don't think I would ever vote for him. But January 6th kind of confirmed that I would never really even have an ounce of, like, genuine, like, support for him. Because I think that really took my dislike from him from like 100 to 1,000. Because after that, it was like, dude, like you handled a situation in which there were a group of people who were actually trying to insurrect the Capitol. You took that and you handled that so shitty. And I understand, like, shoe on heads thing was basically, oh yeah, well, the Capitol actually doesn't mean shit to most people, because most people look at our government and they're like, fuck that. And I get that, and I kind of understand that. But I also think, like, there's part of fixing our issues in America is kind of it's valuing certain things. I think, going for the all-out revolutionary nuclear option where we just burn everything down and start anew, I don't think that's really the best option. I think there should be certain things that we should expect of politicians, and one should be, do not even show an ounce of support for literal insurrectionists who are trying to force a certain political outcome upon a majority of other people. But, that wasn't a deal breaker for most folks, which I totally understand why, because guess what, guys? When the incumbent party that wins that election then spends 4 years doing a lot of stuff, doing a lot of great stuff, but then entirely, like, just being as out of touch as possible with the American public. When I say this is probably of my lifetime the most out of touch administration ever, because at least Republicans, right? At least the Trump administration, I got the feeling that they were kind of honest about how shitty they were, right? With Biden, there was such a degree of, like, artificialness with how they were running things. Albeit, I've been much more active under Biden than under Trump, so, like, maybe there's a little bias there. But just the whole Biden administration has seemingly been all about explaining to Americans talking down to them about how good they have it, how good things actually are. And then you have partisan Democrats parroting these kinds of things. And then when it comes time to vote, these people are so fucking confused when these people that you're saying, oh yeah, you're actually wrong about what your standard of living is like right now. They get so confused when these people then vote against them, vote for Trump. Because for a lot of people, I've noticed Trump has become their only option. Again, they're voting for change. They're voting for something different. And we do not live in a system. Half of this is because of Democrats. Half of it is Republicans. Half of it is Democrats. Both parties have continued to allow us to live in a system where we cannot vote for third parties and have really the ability for that to make a difference. We live under a first past the post system in which whoever gets the most votes wins. And the Electoral College, I think, isn't terrible, but it obviously complicates things if you're going to have a third option. And then on top of all that, these two parties are basically corporations in how much money they have and in what their leadership structure is like and in just how just utterly controlling they are over American politics. I am just really like, I can't feel a degree of sympathy for the Democratic Party when it comes to things like this happening. Sorry, I've been getting over being sick. I can't feel sympathy for the Democrats. I just can't. And I know there's a lot of Americans who feel the same way. There are plenty. Most of the people who voted in this election probably feel the same way. You look at Shiwan Head's video, which I know I've referenced like 5 million times in this video already, but I like her video a lot. She shows her going to Trump rallies and, you know, mentioning Bernie Sanders to them. And a lot of them are more supportive of Bernie than they are of Joe Biden and of Hillary Clinton because, you know, their feeling is that he represented change. He represented something different from this, like, liberal, but, like, very socially liberal, very, you know, status quo liberal establishment within the Democratic Party. They didn't like that. And when, you know, when the questions arose of like, you know, like this is an interesting thing for me to say, right? Because I'm typically a fairly liberal guy. I would say like years ago, I would have described myself as conservative, but when it comes to looking at all my values, I think when you look at all of it, I typically come across as solidly a liberal, someone who believes in liberalism. I don't think I come across as a socialist. I don't think I come across as a conservative necessarily, because I think those things, like, I just have too many disagreements with fellow conservatives and fellow socialists, or peer socialists and peer conservatives, right? I have too many disagreements to really fall under that label. Liberal, But, like, to me, I look at the current state of liberalism in the Democratic Party, and it's just utterly awful. It just literally is. It's just awful. They just, like, it is very condescending. The Democrats are they have been very condescending this entire time. They, yes, have a lot of things that I think were solutions during the Biden administration, but then when it came time to actually talk to the people, and when it came time to, you know, for Biden to step down from the campaign, right, because he very clearly, like, the status quo was not working for Americans. That was so abundantly obvious. They just nominated the vice president. They just nominated Kamala, and then when she had the opportunity to go out and say, I will change this, 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 and this, yeah, she put out a platform, but she put out the same platform the Democrats have had for 15 years. And then she said, when asked, will you change anything from like what has been going on with the Biden administration, with how they've done things? She said no, because again, she's part of it. She's intrinsically a part of all this. I think in terms of like, can you blame her given her position? Maybe not as much because, again, like, she is tied to the administration. But do I absolutely blame her campaign for the way things have gone? Do I absolutely blame the Democratic Party for all of this shit? For Donald Trump now being president twice? I blame them more than any working class American who voted Trump when given Trump or another option. I blame them so much more. And like, the fact that so many people in my generation are hellbent on blaming the working class people, the people that they have been trying to get on their side for years, the people that they know their party has been losing, even though that was like always like the working class common folk American has almost always been like a cornerstone of who the Democrats seek out. But now, you know, now it's become a lot of, like, I don't want to say identity politics because I don't think it's entirely that. Now it's just like they've lost that. They've lost their main, really, like, just a base group that they've always held. And they're moving into a kind of politics that just doesn't work. Like, I'm genuinely starting to consider, like, if they don't make drastic changes, are they going to be able to take either chamber in 2026 as they need to in order to set up a 2028 victory, right? I don't know. I don't know what the future of America looks like, but I know the Democratic Party is more likely to get me what I believe in and what I want. And yet they are like utterly, like, 2024 was just a huge failure in that regard. And I want them to do better. But I cannot support them when this is the kind of party that they run. This is the kind of campaigning that they do. I just can't. And I have to criticize them very, very aggressively, because otherwise the point doesn't get across. And like, I think sometimes when I make videos like these and I talk like this, it comes across as I'm shitting on anybody who's a Democrat, anybody who is even a politician in the Democratic Party. That's not the case. We are not talking about any Democratic voters. We are not talking about people who work for the Democrats on the ground. We are not really talking about anybody at the local or even really state level of Democratic politics. We are talking about the Democratic establishment at the federal level, which runs a lot of the show when it comes to what the mission is. We are talking about characters like I forget her. I think it was Julia Rodriguez, Chavez Rodriguez, who was campaign manager. We're talking about Jen O'Malley or something like that, who I think came back after helping Biden in 2020. We're talking about people like this at the very center of the campaign who made the decision to have these strategies come forward as the main campaign strategy of 2024. They knew what they were doing was not going to work. I fully believe that. I fully believe there is such a small chance that they actually drew this all out when Harris first started her campaign and thought, yeah, this is going to work when it comes to election night. Americans are going to elect our first female president, just because abortion and not Donald Trump. Those were the only two things they ran off of. And in a lot of cases, they like completely fucking neutered the abortion issue because they spent so much time talking about how we're not going back. We're not going to go back to Donald Trump. We went back to Donald Trump because of you. like, there's no other way to put it. Trump was the opposition candidate in this race. In fact, he's built like his entire political career these last 8 years off of being the guy that's the anti-Democrat guy. And the Democrats have actively like made it so good for him. In 2016, he won the race partially because both him and Hillary Clinton were so insufferable, and Hillary Clinton happened to not really be the change candidate in that race. In 2020, he lost because Joe Biden was decent enough for the American people to be different. And also, COVID happened, so nobody had anything fucking better to do than go out and vote. Like no one was doing anything other than that. 2024, that's not the case anymore. Democrats have to actually convince people to vote. They have to actually convince people to support them. We have Gaza. What do they say? Oh, I get that you're concerned, but we just can't be non-diligent and we just can't let Donald Trump become president. And it's like, what do we have to say to these people for them to get it in their heads that Donald Trump not being president is not the central concern of 100% of America? In fact, most Americans, especially ones who are middle class and have to raise families, that's not their central concern. And I understand that that's like scary to you, but that wasn't the case with other terrible politicians. People can't fail politicians. People who are saying, oh yeah, we failed Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. We didn't fail them at all. They failed us. The Democratic Party has failed us to the point where the first female president being a Republican is a very real possibility in the future. Because Democrats, every time they throw a female candidate up there, they run the campaign terribly. They just do. They don't do much else. They do so little that they lose. Hillary Clinton, instead of being this inspiring candidate like Obama, I'm a woman, hear me roar. I'm not Donald Trump. That was a lot of her campaign. She lost. Kamala Harris, even worse. Trump didn't actually get 50% plus one of the vote in like most of the swing states, battleground states in 2016. He did in 2024. He performed so well in 2024. This has to be this has to be for people who think the Democratic Party can win by just saying we're not Trump. This has to be empirical, objective evidence that that is not the case. And it should not be the case. You have to earn votes. If you are running such a bad campaign, if you are doing so poorly, if the way you're doing things is so bad that Donald John Trump is beating you after just 4 years this time, right? And he is doing so with just this overall, people are like, oh yeah, the polls were close. No, the polls always have polling error. And anybody who understood elections analysis went into election night and said Donald Trump is going to win. That's why the betting markets said he was going to win. That's why literally everyone who was making election predictions was like, Trump's going to win. Alan Lichtman said Kamala Harris was going to win. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? And he admitted he was wrong. At least he had some degree of integrity, whereas a lot of Democrats just want to sit here and moan about how much they hate Americans. It's like, are you fucking serious? You guys do realize, you can't just give up and give the country to Republicans. People don't want that. People want the Democratic Party to be better than this. They want the Democratic Party to be better at campaigning. I think most voters feel better. And a lot of people like me who are more on the modernist end of things and think there's a lot of things we could change about this country that would make it 10 times better, right? Ranked choice voting, campaign finance reform. We can make this country politically better, right? A lot of people like me are just sitting here well, this is what happens when you don't you don't even try to play safe, because at this point, not taking any modernist positions isn't even playing safe anymore, because it's not a safe move. It wasn't a safe move for her to just sit there, waste money on one and people are like, oh, this was the podcast election. I think a big part of it could be that. I think a big part of it could be the fact that she just didn't do the Joe Rogan opportunity. She didn't take it. Donald Trump did. It was massively successful. She wasted money on opportunities that she thought were like Joe Rogan, but actually were not. They very much were different. Didn't even reach 1 million views with a lot of them. how much, like, this has to be an indictment for people of what happens when you don't present people with this degree of being in touch with them. You're out of touch. That's like what I want to tell Democrats. Every single Democratic consultant who is looking at this, I want to tell them, Americans, there's too much wealth inequality and too much Americans feeling poorer for you to just sit there and run a campaign off of we're not the other guy. That doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't. It worked in 1964 with Lyndon B. Johnson and Barry Goldwater. It worked then. It doesn't work now. 60 years later, it does not work. And so, yeah, I think like what Shuan's had said, I know I'm bringing it up a million times, like what she said, they have to change. They have to make adjustments. They have to be better. They have to be better and give proposals and mainly fight on those proposals and not make a huge majority of their campaign about not being the other guy. They have to be more in touch. They have to say, yeah, you're hurting and we know. And we see that. We're not just going to stand here and say, well, actually, the economy is great. No, like, we're going to understand where people are at, what people are saying. When the economy is the number one issue and you lose this badly, there has to be recognition of that. And if you don't want to recognize that, then fucking leave, because you don't want the best for this country. You actively do not want what's best for this country. What's best for this country is that, yes, we're not happy about the fact that Donald Trump is elected, but we also don't stay delusional and entirely out of it with why it happened. We can be upset. Like, as much as I don't like it and I think it's total bullshit, you can even be upset at people who voted for him. But if you don't even, like, my main number one concern is that you understand why it happened. You understand why they voted for him. Because if you don't, that's a major issue, and you should not, like, you should not be actively going for, like, you know, like, oh my God. Oh yeah, by the way, I found one of my old toys. It was just sitting here in the office somewhere. Oh man. Oh man. It frustrates me when I see how badly things are in regards to certain political things, and how just it feels like everyone is so upset about one thing when they really, like, that is not like I guess my closing message with all this is the people cannot let the politicians down. That is not a thing. It has never been a thing. That is not how it works, especially in a country of 300 plus million people. In this kind of country, the politicians let the people down. And Kamala Harris's campaign, if not Kamala Harris herself, have let the people down. They just have. Because they've run a campaign, and the Democratic Party has run a campaign, and they have coordinated things in a way that has now given Donald John Trump a trifecta. And yeah, that should be frustrating, and we have to demand better. We have to expect better. Hell, I'm part of me is encouraged to sign up to be a Democrat just so I can vote in the next primary for something different to happen, for something different to occur. And, you know, that's astonishing to me. That is truly astonishing to me that I'm having those thoughts, that the Democratic Party is doing that poorly because of stuff like that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Hopefully anybody who listened to this for some fucking reason got something out of this, maybe understood a different perspective on this issue, a different take. Yeah, this shit is crazy, and I am Yeah. Yeah, I'm so done with a lot of it.